What do you think? Is there such a thing as the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? Did he really create the world in 6 days and rest on the seventh day? Does the Bible really tell us how it all began? What about evolution, Big Bang Theory, intelligent design? Is there really such a thing as science versus religion? Can they ever agree? Is one right and the other wrong? Do we have evidence for one and not the other? These are the questions that I'll try to answer in this short message. I am a Christian. I believe that the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob is the one true God, the creator of all things. The Bible is his word. Jesus Christ is his son, our savior, and the resurrection is real. But I am also a scientist. I love reading science books, watching science documentaries, asking questions and seeking answers from the natural world around me. In fact, I got my PhD in molecular biology. My research was focused on understanding how life begins. How does one become a Christian and a scientist at the same time? Aren't these two areas of study mutually exclusive? Does being a Christian mean that you have to reject science? Does being a scientist mean that you have to reject Christianity? Well, let me say this. If you want to be a good scientist, you must start with a good worldview and ask questions based on that worldview. If you start with no worldview or a bad worldview, you will end up asking bad questions and getting bad answers. For example, if you don't believe in a creator, then you won't ask questions about origins. You see, scientists ask questions about origins. Astronomers ask questions about the beginning of the universe. Evolutionary biologists ask questions about the origin of species, and biochemists ask questions about the origin of life. And the answers that they get depend greatly on what they believe about origins. So the first step in becoming a good scientist is to have a good worldview. Now, if you want to be a biblical scientist, you must take the first 11 chapters of the book of Genesis very seriously. It tells us how the world began. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now that's a great starting point. We can now ask some scientific questions. Why did God create the world? What was the world like before it was created? What happened at the Big Bang? How did life begin? Did God use evolution to create living things? Is there evidence in the world today that points to a creator? These are good scientific questions that can be asked based on a Christian worldview. Now, if you don't believe that God created the world in 6 days, then you would have to interpret the Genesis account allegorically or metaphorically. And if you don't believe that the world was created by a supernatural being, then you probably wouldn't even ask these kinds of questions. The way you view origins determines the kind of questions you ask. Your questions determine the kind of experiments you do. Your experiments lead to your conclusions, and your conclusions lead to your worldview. So the Christian worldview leads to different conclusions than an evolutionary worldview. So here is what I conclude based on the Genesis account. There are 3. God created the world in 6 days and rested on the 7th day. There was a beginning. Living things were created by a supernatural process. God used the process of evolution to create living things. Let's look at each one separately. Day 1. God created light and separated it from darkness. He called light day and darkness night. That's 6 hours. Day 2. God created an atmosphere, separating the waters from each other and calling them sea and sky. Day 3. God created dry land, which he called earth, and gathered the waters into one place, which we call the ocean. On the 4th day, God created the sun, the moon, and the stars. On the 5th day, God created living creatures in the seas and in the skies. And on the 6th day, God created land, animals, and people. On the 7th day, God rested from all his work. That's 6 days. Now, if you don't believe that God created the world in 6 days, then you would have to interpret the Genesis account allegorically or metaphorically. If you read the creation account in Genesis literally, the numbers must mean something. Numbers don't just appear out of nowhere, they mean something. So when the author says that God created the world in 6 days, he means something by those numbers. It doesn't mean for billion years or 400 million years or 400 million years. If it did, why didn't he just say so? Numbers have meaning. So if God created the world in 6 days, then that means that the earth is young, no more than 10 to 12,000 years old. Anything older than that would require millions or billions of years to form, and this conflicts with the Genesis account. How could scientists have concluded that the earth is 4.5 billion years old? Well, because they made certain assumptions about the age of rocks found on meteorites, the age of the sun, and the distance between the earth and the sun. But what if they were wrong about the age of rocks on meteorites, or the age of the sun, or the distance between the earth and the sun? What if all these measurements and calculations were wrong? The calculations tell us that the earth is billions of years old, but we have no physical evidence to back up these numbers. The math works out perfectly to support an old earth, but what if the math is wrong? How old is the earth really? Well, we don't know unless someone gets the initiative to do the experiments and verify these numbers. If someone finds out that the earth is only thousands of years old and not billions of years old, that would shake the foundations of modern geology and modern biology. But how could anyone conclude that life on Earth began in a supernatural event? When we compare DNA from different organisms, we find that the differences between the most different organisms is only about 20%. This means that all life on Earth share a common ancestor. The differences between the genetic code of the simplest bacterium and the most complex animal is only about 20%. If bacteria and animals both had their genetic material written in the language of DNA, yet the difference between them is only about 20%, then all life on Earth must have originated from a single source. The differences accumulated over time, causing new species to evolve. And since all life on Earth is related by descent, we can trace our own origins back to single-cell organisms that appeared suddenly in the fossil record, which scientists call the Cambrian explosion. This is where we find the earliest evidence of complex life, and this is where we find the beginnings of major groups of animals. And in order for all this to occur, you need a starting point, a trigger event that caused the explosion of life. This trigger event fits perfectly with the biblical account of creation. God created the world in 6 days and rested on the 7th day. There was a beginning. Life began supernaturally. If you think that life began by chance, just consider this. If you left a deck of playing cards on a table and walked away for a few minutes, would you return to find that the deck of cards has arranged itself in order from ace to king? No. If you left the deck of cards on a table and came back in 100 years, would you expect it to be in order? No, but that's exactly what happened when life arose on Earth. Life just happened by chance. It went from being totally lifeless to being teeming with single-cell organisms in an instant. If you believe that life just happened by chance, you must conclude that this would have happened many times on many planets, but we don't find any evidence of life anywhere else. So if life just happened by chance, it must have been a rare occurrence, a once-in-a-trillion type of event that occurred on Earth, which is highly unlikely. But if this event was caused by a supernatural being, then this becomes much more likely and the origin of life becomes more plausible. Did God use evolution to create living things? Yes, absolutely. The theory of evolution is correct. Species do evolve over time. New species arise from pre-existing species. All life on Earth is related by descent, and the differences accumulated over time, causing new species to arise. But for evolution to work, you need a starting point, a trigger event that caused the explosion of life. And this trigger event fits perfectly with the biblical account of creation. God created the world in 6 days and rested on the 7th day. There was a beginning. Life began supernaturally, and God used the process of evolution to create living things. So what do you think? Is there such a thing as the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? Did he really create the world in 6 days and rest on the 7th day? Does the Bible really tell us how it all began? What about evolution, Big Bang Theory, intelligent design? What do you think? Write your comments below. I would love to hear from you. Thank you for watching.